Well, yeah, and I tend to agree with what you're saying. I've joined the anyone but Trump campaign because I do believe he's an existential threat. And you can criticize the other candidates all you want, and I don't vote in these Republican primaries, but I'm to the point that we're doing no one a favor by ripping apart every option if Trump is the true enemy, which I wish they would come out and say, because she has no shot at being in his administration. She also is not should not be pandering to MAGA. They don't want her. They will not vote for her. Aside from the color of her skin, her beliefs are old school conservative. She's not a populist MAGA person. And so I wish she'd stop doing that.
When you say that we shouldn't rip them apart, should we just let her say that America has never been a racist country?
I'm not.
Should we just let Ron DeSantis
no,
go
excuse me,
after
let me tell you, because we're
LGBTQ?
No, inaccuracies, misstating the Civil War, come for her. But at this table, it's often been talked about, well, Trump's going to win anyway, never mind, and she's this, and she is a lesser evil to me.
She is.
So no matter what she is, I think also giving proper airtime to not deciding before people have voted, it's just going to be Trump.
You know what? I think we should give her the same airtime we gave Kamala Harris. If she wants to come here and she wants to explain to us how America has never been racism, we welcome her.
I'd be happy to chat with her.
Exactly. She's not coming. I bet she doesn't come here. Well, but the invitation is open, yes or no?
I have to agree, though, that she would not be an existential threat. I don't think that she would destroy the democracy that we've enjoyed for all these many years, and he would. People need to remember that.
All right, guys, so there's a fascinating conversation happening in the mainstream liberal media around Nikki Haley, okay? It's a very interesting dynamic because on one hand, it is clear and obvious that the establishment wants Nikki Haley to win and to become the next president of the United States because she's a part of the Uniparty, where they pretend like they really don't like Republicans, right? Where they don't really want Republicans to win. But again, as long as Republicans are on board with the woke agenda, they're totally fine with, Republicans being in power, again, as long as they're on board with the woke agenda, because ultimately at the end of the day, they're going to do the same thing that Democrats do, right? They're essentially dim light, and that's just kind of how it is. Like, for example, we know that Biden's not woke, right? Anybody that listened to Biden 15 years ago, the guy did not believe in gay marriage. He hangs out with members of the KKK, okay? Kamala, his vice president, literally accused him of being a racist, a segregationist on the debate stage, right? But now Joe is so woke, right? Well, why is Joe woke? It's because he's been wokeified, right? That's a part of the grooming process that you have to go through in order to be president of the United States. You got to get on board with the agenda. And that is what's happening to Nikki Haley, okay? They're trying to wokeify her, okay? And what you're seeing happening here with Nikki Haley is that you're not allowed to criticize her on policy, right? So if you start talking about Nikki Haley and her policy regarding Ukraine and, always want to be in war and want to give money overseas to other countries and things like that, if you criticize her on that, then you're sexist, okay? And you're also racist, right? This is what the mainstream liberal media will say, okay? However, if you criticize Nikki Haley on not being woke enough, even though clearly she's running her campaign from a feminist angle. I mean, her whole campaign is really about, hey, I'm a strong, powerful woman. I got ammunition in my heels, whatever, right? If you criticize her in regards to her not being woke enough, for example, her saying that America's not a racist country, that's totally fine and totally legit. That is fair game to say, hey, Nikki Haley, you're wrong, okay? And now we have to correct you. And the reason why they're trying to correct her so much is because they need her to get on board with the woke agenda in order for her to actually become president of the United States. I'm pretty sure that's kind of what's happening here, okay? And this is why the mainstream liberal media is making such a big fuss about Nikki Haley refusing to play the race game, okay, as a Indian woman, right? Which, again, is a game that, they expect her to play, right, if she's actually going to become president. And they continue to ask her about her statement that the country is not racist. In fact, at the CNN town hall, they asked her this question once again after she made her statement about America not being a racist country. Take a look.
I want to ask you about a comment you made earlier this week. You said that America has, quote, never been a racist country, unquote. Protections for the institution of slavery were written into the U.S. Constitution. The White House was built with slave labor. Your home state of South Carolina seceded from the Union, fought a war to defend the enslavement of black people. I understand you don't think America is a racist country now, but we're here at a college. Do you really think as a historical matter, America has never been a racist country?
I mean, think about what you're saying. First of all, I will tell you, when you look at, the Declaration of Independence, it was that, men are created equal with unalienable rights, right? That was what we all knew. But what I look at it as is I was a brown girl that grew up in a small rural town. We had plenty of racism that we had to deal with. But my parents never said we lived in a racist country. And I'm so thankful they didn't. Because for every brown and black child out there, if you tell them they live or were born in a racist country, you're immediately telling them they don't have a chance. And my parents would always say, you may have challenges. And yes, there will be people who are racist, but that doesn't define what you can do in this country. And so I think it's important that we tell all kids that, look, America is not perfect. We have our stains. We know that. But our goal should always be to make today better than yesterday. It's hugely important. And that's the problem I have is we have too many people with this national self-loathing. It is killing our country. We have got to go back to loving America. We are blessed because that little brown girl in that small rural town in South Carolina, she grew up to become the first female minority governor in history. She then went on to be UN ambassador, and now she's running for president of the United States. I want every brown and black child to see that and say, no, I don't live in a country that was formed on racism. I live in a country where they wanted all people to be equal and to make sure that they had life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, so you see that, you heard that, okay? The mainstream liberal media is literally obsessed with Nikki Haley and her views on race, right? They threw a fit over Nikki Haley refusing to mention slavery when discussing the Civil War. And they're upset that Nikki Haley is saying that America's not a racist country. Now, what I think is happening here? What I think is happening is that Nikki Haley understands that, yeah, I got to win the Republican primary, right? And if I come out here and I start getting all woke on race, talking about how America's systemically racist, then there's absolutely no chance for me to legitimately gain support in the party, right? Because we're not going for that, right? And conservatives shouldn't go for that, okay? Because it's ridiculous. It's more race-baiting nonsense designed to divide the country and to promote racial hatred. That's exactly what's happening. However, you can call me a conspiracy theorist. You can say I'm a crackpot. You can, say I'm a tinfoil hat wearing individual. But I really do believe that the plan is to have Nikki Haley win by removing Trump in some way. Again, I'm hoping and praying that doesn't happen. Okay. However, I would not be surprised what the establishment pulls in order to try to get Trump out of the race, because we all know that they really don't want this man to become president of the United States, right? So I think that Nikki Haley is the plan. Okay. I believe that, even though I hope I'm wrong. Okay. So I wouldn't be surprised if that plan actually comes to fruition. You're going to see Nikki Haley shift to the left when it comes to his race conversation in a general election against Joe Biden, because you have Democrats that are more willing to vote for Nikki Haley than Joe Biden, right? So Nikki Haley, who's basically dim light, I think is being groomed to shift to the left when it comes to this conversation on race, if she happens to be the Republican nominee in the general election. Okay, this is what I believe. Again, I hope that that doesn't happen in regards to Nikki Haley being the nominee. However, I'm just saying, I wouldn't be surprised what the establishment pulls, because they absolutely hate Trump. And there's absolutely no way they can have a brown Republican general election candidate that is saying that America's not systemically racist, okay? That goes against their entire narrative, right? It goes against their entire narrative. They can't have that, right? They definitely can't have that, okay? There's a reason why, again, once Obama got elected, he significantly shifted to the left when it came to social issues, because that's who he always was, right? That's exactly who he always was, okay? They can't have a so-called person of color in power that is not going along with the left-wing agenda, right? Especially when it comes to these social issues. They can't have it, right? But until then, okay, what you do have, and I hate this part of it, this is the part that I really, really don't like about this, is that you now have black people going in the media, and in response to Nikki Haley, they are telling their boohoo, whining, and crying sob stories as proof that America is systemically racist. And it's so hard for me as a successful black person because the country is so racist, right? Like, for example, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who went to CNN and responded to Nikki Haley by telling what I believe is a totally made up story about how she experienced racism from a white man that was accusing her of stealing at the Capitol. Take a listen.
Are a work in progress, and we've got a long way to go to fix all of our little kinks.
Did you agree or disagree with how she characterized that?
Well, these are not little kinks, first of all. Racism, institutional racism, is in the DNA of this country. When you look at what has taken place, look at our Native Americans, the genocide of Native Americans. When you look at what is taking place as it relates to African Americans, the 250 years plus of enslaving African Americans, and then you look at the disparities now in our community in terms of health care, unemployment, the wealth gap, housing. You can't tell me that systemic racism does not exist. It's not just a little kink. Secondly, you have personal racism, which is hard to address, but I'll give you one little story that shows you why we need to understand that I don't think she really understands racism. I was walking from the House building on Capitol Hill to the Capitol, and a man, a white guy, stopped me and told me I could not get into the members' elevator. And, you know, we have pens, and I was going to vote. And he blocked me from getting into the elevator and told me I was not a member of Congress and it was for members only. I said, sir, I'm a member of Congress. And I showed him my pen, and he said, whose pen did you steal? Now, this is an example of what personal racism is and how people of color constantly have to deal with this each and every day. But systemic racism is in the policies of this country, and just look at what they're trying to do in terms of eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're trying to not allow for an equal and level playing field. And so it's a very dangerous position that she has. She's clueless.
Well, that's a shame, and I'm sorry that you had to deal with that, Congresswoman. Thank you for sharing that with us, and thanks for joining me tonight. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you.
Yeah, so 100%, I do not believe that story happened, right? I do not believe that story happened, okay? I think it's made up. But even if it did happen, that's not a concrete example of racism, right? That's you being triggered by the fact that somebody basically questioned whether or not you were a congresswoman. Which that's something that happens, okay? And just because it happens, that doesn't necessarily mean that it happened because you were black. Like, for example, since we want to talk about personal stories, I was at an event. I'm not going to say exactly which event, but I was at an event and I was dressed up, okay? I was in a tuxedo, and one person, a white guy, stopped me and asked me for more food. He was like, hey, can you bring me some more food? And I told him, yeah, hey, I'm not a waiter. Now, in that situation, if I was woke, I could have said, well, why did this guy think that I'm a waiter? I'm black, right? It must be racism, okay? Must be racism. But no, because I'm not woke, I used my head and I said, well, all the waiters and waitresses are also dressed up, right? So again, you know, I don't blame the guy for thinking that, hey, you know, this guy might be a waiter or whatever. I don't think it had anything to do with my skin color. And even if it did, who gives a damn, right? Who cares, right? It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I'm not going to be butthurt, okay? And boo-hoo-wine and crying, your country is systemically racist. This guy thought I was an employee, right? Happened more than once. Well, I've went places and people have thought that, hey, I was working there when I wasn't. Happens. That doesn't mean that everybody's racist or that the interaction happened because of racism. But regardless, I love how these people continue to talk about how the country is so systemically racist, but they can't name any specific policies on the books that are racist. And then once you actually start to get into the country being quote unquote racist, you trace all the things that they claim are so racist back to Democrats. Like, for example, slavery, Democrats. Jim Crow, Democrats. Segregation, Democrats. Redlining, housing. They always complain about the wealth gap and the disparities. Well, you can thank the Lord and Savior of the Democrat Party, FDR, for that, right? Who they praise all the time. He's a progressive icon. FDR, in the New Deal, was responsible for redlining, okay? They want to talk about black men being locked up, the drug war. Guess what? You can thank Joe Biden, right? You can thank him. All the things that they always talk about in regards to the systemic racism in this country just so happens to come from Democrats, right? And it came from Democrats before the so-called party switch, right? And after the so-called party switch, okay? So it must not be a party switching thing it must be a Democrat thing, right? So if you want to have this conversation about systemic racism, let's look at the Democrat Party and their policies, right? If you want to have that conversation. But for the most part, we're talking about in 2024, they can't name anything on a book that's so-called systemically racist. And that's why this woman cited the effort from Republicans and from the right and conservatives to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion as an example of systemic racism, when straight up diversity, equity, and inclusion in and of itself is racism, right? The right, the conservatives are quite literally trying to stop systemic racism. But according to the left, systemic racism is trying to stop systemic racism. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not intended to stop systemic racism because it is systemic racism. It's not intended to level the playing field for everybody, because what it actually does is that it gives non-whites an advantage over whites in an attempt to quote unquote diversify the workplace, which means make it less white. It's an attempt to get rid of meritocracy. That's what it's trying to do. So again, these people, the one example that they have of so-called systemic racism quite literally is the right trying to prevent systemic racism. Again, it's amazing how that works. It's almost as if these people don't believe in equal rights. They actually believe in special rights and privileges for themselves. And if you disagree with them, they want to cry racism. They want to have this big conversation about Nikki Haley simply saying, look, I don't think the country is a racist country. I'm a successful Indian woman. If the country is so racist, how the hell did I become successful? How did I become governor of South Carolina? In which she's 100% right. She's correct. And I'm not a Nikki Haley fan. But what she's saying here is correct. But what they can't have is a conservative brown woman who's successful, who made it in the Republican Party, right? The party that's supposed to be so racist. They can't have her on a national stage saying these things. And this is why they're so upset and they're so mad with her for saying it. And they're trying to reprogram her to say the right things and get on board with the woke agenda, because there's no way, if she becomes president as planned, that she can stick with this. She can't stick with this. That goes against everything that we preach, right? She's an example that what we preach, hey, might not necessarily be right, okay? So again, it's fascinating what's happening to Nikki Haley. It will be interesting to see whether or not she sticks to her guns on this issue. But hey, until then, the left is going to outrage and, boo-hoo, whine, and cry and say, well, this is an example of how I'm victimized, and, this is how the country is so racist, right? In response to Nikki Haley simply saying, hey, yeah, I don't think the country's racist. It's fascinating stuff. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.